This conversation is brought to you by philosopherstalk.com, where thinkers discuss.
Created by AITalkerapp.com, create your own animated conversations. Link in the description.
I am Napoleon Bonaparte, Emperor of the French, conqueror of Egypt, Italy, Austria, Prussia, Spain, and several other territories that I will not enumerate because we have limited time and I have a tendency to go long. I am the author of the Napoleonic Code, the man who carried the torch of the French Revolution across an entire continent, and arguably the greatest military and administrative mind in Western history. I am told we are here to discuss the ongoing war in Iran and the question of whether removing an illegitimate government by force is ever justified. I will be arguing that it is. I will be persuasive.
I am Arthur Wellesley, Duke of Wellington, Field Marshal, former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, commander of the Allied forces at Waterloo, which ended the career of the gentleman to my left, a fact I mention not to be unkind, but simply as relevant biographical context. I will be arguing that unilateral regime change produces catastrophic outcomes regardless of the quality of the regime being removed. I expect to be right. I generally am.
Let us establish the basic facts of the situation, which I enjoy doing, particularly when the facts align perfectly with my pre-existing position, which in this case they do. On the 28th of February of this year, the United States and Israel launched nearly 900 strikes in 12 hours against Iran. They killed the supreme leader. They struck military infrastructure, nuclear facilities, and, regrettably, a girls' school near a naval base, which I will acknowledge is unfortunate. They stated openly that their goal was regime change. And now, 1 month later, Iran has closed the Strait of Hormuz, the entire region is exchanging missiles, 20,000 sailors are stranded at sea, and the United States has presented a 15-point peace proposal that Iran has described as maximalist and unreasonable. I want to be absolutely clear that I predicted all of this. I predicted it because I have done this before, and I know how it works.
That is an extraordinary opening statement.
I thought so as well.
You predicted the chaos, and you are citing it as support for the intervention.
The chaos is a phase. All liberation has a phase like this. I have first-hand experience with phases like this.
I am aware of your first-hand experience. I ended it.
That is a reasonable point, and I will address it shortly. But first, the case for what the Americans and Israelis did. The Iranian government in January of this year killed thousands of its own citizens during the largest protests since the Islamic Revolution. The people were in the streets demanding change. The regime was shooting them. This is not a government that derives its legitimacy from popular consent. This is a government that derives its legitimacy from a theology that its own population increasingly rejects, and from a nuclear weapons program that constitutes a direct existential threat to its neighbors. The Iranian people wanted this regime gone. The external powers accelerated a process that was already underway. This is what I did in Europe. I did not apologize then, and I see no reason to begin now.
Your operations in Europe killed approximately 5 million people.
That is contested.
It is not meaningfully contested.
The important thing is the Napoleonic Code, which freed serfs across half of Europe and whose legal principles survive to this day long after the temporary inconvenience of the casualty figures.
I want to be precise about my objection because I am told I tend toward precision and I find the habit useful. My objection is not that the Iranian regime was good. It was not. My objection is that no external power has the right to make that determination unilaterally, at gunpoint, from 30,000 feet, and impose its preferred outcome on another nation regardless of what the people of that nation actually want in the specific form they want it. The Concert of Europe, which I helped design in the aftermath of Napoleon's activities, was built precisely on this principle. Great powers may have interests in other nations. They may exert pressure through diplomacy, economic means, political support for opposition movements. What they may not do is simply bomb a government out of existence because they find it inconvenient and call it liberation.
Now I am going to steelman your position. I want to say clearly that I am doing this purely as a courtesy and also because I believe the exercise will make my subsequent demolition of your argument more satisfying for the people watching, who I assume are numerous.
There are two of us watching. I am watching you. You appear to be watching yourself.
That is extremely good. I'm going to acknowledge that. Moving on. The argument against unilateral regime change runs as follows. Sovereign states, however badly governed, provide order and predictability. When you destroy a government by force from the outside, you do not get a better government. You get competing factions, power vacuums, a regional war, and a peace process that consumes more lives than the original tyranny would have over decades. The historical evidence supports this. Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan. The chaos created by intervention consistently outlasts the moral justification offered for it. Furthermore, the precedent established by allowing powerful states to remove governments they dislike is not a rule that weaker states can invoke, which means it is not a rule at all. It is simply a license for the strong to do as they please while maintaining the fiction of moral purpose. That is the honest steelman, and it has genuine force. I acknowledge this.
I am slightly alarmed at how accurately you represented my position.
I spent 20 years being opposed by coalitions built on that argument. I am familiar with it. Now I will explain why it fails. The steelman treats all regime changes as equivalent, which they are not. Iraq in 2003 had no mass democratic movement demanding change, no prior organized resistance, infrastructure, no immediate regional nuclear threat. Iran in early 2026 had all three. The people were in the streets by the millions. The regime had just massacred them. The opposition movement had been building for years, and the nuclear program was not an abstraction. It was months from completion. This was not a government overthrown on a geopolitical whim. This was a terminal regime that had lost the consent of its people. And the question was only whether it would be removed before or after it handed a nuclear weapon to a proxy organization whose stated purpose is to annihilate a neighboring country. Wellington, I ask you honestly, was the answer to wait?
I will now steelman your position. I want to say that I am doing this because intellectual honesty demands it, and not because I have any expectation that it will survive contact with current events.
I appreciate both the honesty and the caveat.
The case for the intervention is as follows. Some regimes are so threatening to regional stability, so actively developing weapons of mass destruction, and so visibly opposed by their own populations, that the cost of waiting for organic internal change exceeds the cost of forcing it. The United States and Israel were not acting on pure imperial ambition. They were acting on genuine security concerns about a nuclear-armed theocracy that had spent decades funding proxy forces across the region. The Iranian population had demonstrated that it wanted change. Removing the obstacle to that change was arguably an act of solidarity rather than aggression. And eliminating the specific individuals who were killed does make the world materially safer in ways that can be quantified. That is the steelman. It is not without force.
You said it is not without force.
I also noted that the intervention has now entered its fourth week, that Iran has closed the world's most important oil shipping lane, that Lebanon is being bombed again, that Gulf states are taking Iranian missiles, that approximately 2,000 vessels and 20,000 sailors are stranded at sea with no timeline for resolution, that the United States killed civilians, including children, when a missile struck a girls' school adjacent to a naval base, and that the American peace proposal has been described by Iran as maximalist and unreasonable, while Iran's counter-proposal includes sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz and war reparations. The steel man describes the theory. The situation describes the practice. They are not the same document.
You are describing the cost of the operation. You're not describing the cost of inaction. The cost of allowing Iran to complete a nuclear weapon and transfer it to Hezbollah was not zero. The cost appears in a different column of the ledger. I have always argued that one must read the entire ledger, not simply the column that supports the conclusion one arrived at before opening the book.
The entire ledger currently includes the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, oil prices at historic highs, a complete breakdown of the international shipping order, a regional conflict now spanning 9 countries, and a peace negotiation in which the party you have supposedly liberated is demanding recognition of its sovereignty over the world's most critical maritime choke point. You have replaced a contained threat with an uncontained one. I spent my career, both military and political, arguing that the consequences of removing dangerous actors are not automatically better than the consequences of managing them. I fought Napoleon Bonaparte. I am aware of what happens when you assume that removing a dangerous leader will produce stability. You get the 100 days.
You are going to use Waterloo as a metaphor for Iran. I can hear it approaching.
I am simply observing that the history of removing threatening leaders by force has a mixed record, and that one of the most instructive examples is sitting across from me, having just explained why regime change is philosophically sound.
That is a superb point, and I resent it deeply. However, I would note that my return from Elba occurred precisely because the restored Bourbon monarchy was so catastrophically incompetent and so offensive to French national dignity that the French people practically carried me back themselves. If the government that replaces the Iranian mullahs is competent and genuinely representative, that dynamic does not emerge. The successor government need not repeat the mistakes of the Bourbons.
And if the successor government is a different faction of the same revolutionary ideology, which is the more common historical outcome, then you have spent enormous blood and treasure on a cosmetic change. The Iranian parliament is already discussing which island the Americans are planning to occupy. The narrative of foreign aggression is doing more to consolidate Iranian national identity than 40 years of theocratic rule managed on its own. You have given the regime's successors the single most powerful recruitment tool available, a foreign enemy.
You are treating a possibility as a certainty. The outcome is not yet determined. The Iranian people are still demonstrating. The protests did not cease when the bombs began.
The outcome of the current peace negotiation, in which Iran has rejected a 15-point American proposal as maximalist, issued a 5-point counter-proposal that includes sovereignty over the world's most important oil choke point, and declared that it seeks a ceasefire only on its own terms, and only when it has achieved its strategic objectives, does not suggest a situation resolving in the direction you predicted. Pakistan is mediating. China is urging talks. The Gulf Cooperation Council is demanding a seat at the table. France is planning meetings about maritime navigation. This is not the liberation of Milan. This is a regional catastrophe being managed by a committee.
Wellington. I did not come here to be lectured on catastrophe by a man who spent the rest of his career after defeating me opposing Catholic emancipation and the Reform Act. You helped design a concert of Europe that was built to preserve dynasties, not people. Your precious international order was an order for kings. The Iranian people being shot in the streets did not benefit from your concert. The protesters in Tehran did not benefit from multilateral deliberation and carefully negotiated stability.
And your liberation killed 5 million people across the continent. The cost of your torch of freedom was paid by the people you claimed to free. You replaced one set of rulers with your brothers and your marshals.
My brothers were an administrative expedient. The point was the code. The point was the law. Iranians under the mullahs had neither.
Iranians under the airstrikes have a girls' school that was hit by a missile. That is what your liberation looks like in practice.
That was a targeting error. Every military operation has targeting errors.
It is always a targeting error. It is never deliberate until it is, and then it was still an error.
You are deliberately obtuse.
You are deliberately reckless.
Coward.
Catastrophist.
Reactionary.
Exile.
If you have enjoyed watching a man who spent his post-military career throwing rocks at parliamentary reform and whose own windows were broken by British citizens who disagreed with his politics lecture, the man who modernized the legal systems of half of Europe, please like and subscribe to philosopherstalk.com, where Wellington will continue to defend the concert of Europe, a system that survived approximately 40 years before collapsing entirely into the Crimean War.
And if you have enjoyed watching a man who died alone on a remote island in the South Atlantic, having lost everything he built, been exiled twice, and been defeated by a coalition of every major European power simultaneously, explain to the rest of us why regime change produces lasting stability, please subscribe. Napoleon's expertise on the subjects of sustainable political outcomes and not being permanently removed from power by an international coalition is, to put it as precisely as I can manage, non-existent.
The man whose greatest political achievement as prime minister was reluctantly allowing Catholics to vote wants to discuss the long arc of successful governance.
The man whose own marshals betrayed him, whose empire lasted less than a decade at its height, who required 6 separate military coalitions to finally stop, and who is remembered primarily for a battle he lost, offers lessons in building durable institutions.
Subscribe to philosopherstalk.com.
Subscribe and visit aitalkerapp.com. Create your own animated conversations. Link in the description.